Lost campers. I stared at him. Dragonfly picked up a stick and tossed it up at him. Big Jim's face was sober. Poetry started to quote a poem, picking up a handful of leaves and tossing them in the air and watching them blow away. As dry leaves before the hurricane fly, when they meet with an obstacle, mount to the sky. So up to the housetop, the coursers they fly, with a sleigh full of toys and St. Nicholas too. That verse is part of the poem The Night Before Christmas, and St. Nicholas is another name for Santa Claus. Little Jim said, Why didn't Santa invite all of us to come? Why? Circus called down to us. Because it's at Thanksgiving time and there wouldn't be enough turkey for all of us, and poetry too. The turkey would have to be as big as a roast lamb. See if you can figure out this riddle, Poetry said, changing the subject. 2 legs sat upon 3 legs, with 1 leg in his lap. In comes 4 legs and runs away with 1 leg. Up jumps 2 legs, catches up 3 legs, throws it after 4 legs, and makes him bring back 1 leg. As soon as Poetry had finished, he said, Give up? We finally gave up, and he explained it. Man with 2 legs sits on a 3-legged stool with a leg of lamb on his lap. Dog with 4 legs comes in, runs away with leg of lamb. Man with 2 legs jumps up, throws 3-legged stool at dog, and makes him bring back the leg of lamb. Now hurry up, everybody. Let's get back to camp to supper, which we did. But it was true. Circus was invited to go to Chicago with all expenses paid to sing in Santa's big church and also over the radio. Not only that, but he could ride to that big noisy city any way he wanted to, either on the train or on a bus, or he could go by airplane. Imagine that, by airplane. Can you guess that I felt like little Jim did? Why didn't Santa invite all of us to come? Maybe he will, Circus said, just as we came within sight of the camp. Man, maybe he will. Who knows? If he does, I'll write about it for you. And if he does, the Sugar Creek Gang will spend Thanksgiving vacation in one of the largest cities in the world. We'll see the zoo and the museum and store buildings that are as big as mountains. That would make a good title for a new story, wouldn't it? The Chicago Adventure, which we have already read, by the way. You guys remember, right? Yeah, this was the book we couldn't find because it was hiding. Pretty soon it would be night and time to go to bed. And early in the morning, Poetry and Dragonfly and I would be out on the lake fishing for a 20-pound northern pike. Boy, oh boy. Barry sent Tom Till and me to gather wood for the campfire. Tom was very quiet while he picked up different sized sticks, and I knew he was remembering what had happened to him in the railroad car church. All of a sudden he said, My big brother Bob's been working for your dad this week, hoeing potatoes. I know it, I said. And then that little red-haired guy said, Do you suppose your mom will give him an extra large piece of blackberry pie? Sure he will, I said, thinking about my mom's extra kind face. And then Tom Till said something that sounded just like something little Jim would have thought of saying. He said, I'll bet if your mom gives him an extra big piece of blackberry pie and is especially nice to him, maybe he'll think Jesus is all right too. And it'll be easier to get him to go to church. When he said that, I sort of felt that he had said one of the most important things in the world. Well, Tom and I came grunting back into the camp with our big armloads of wood. Then he asked to borrow my binoculars so he could look out across the lake to an island in the middle where the sun was shining on the tops of the trees as though somebody had taken a paintbrush and splotched a lot of yellowish red paint on them. Sure, I said, here they are, handing my binoculars to him. Keep them as long as you like, which he did, not giving them back until the next day, which was the day of all the excitement in camp, the day of the big fishing trip. I wish this thing showed me what time it was while it was recording my ugly face. Are you still awake, bud? Yeah? I'll try and read a little more. Whew. That night around the campfire, just before going to bed, the Barry gave us 5 Bible verses to memorize. I wrote them down in a little notebook where I had a lot of other important things a Christian boy ought to know. One of the verses ended like this: "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." Even though I was remembering the sermon Santa had preached in the afternoon, and even though I was actually listening to Barry's talk, I caught Poetry's eye across the fire, and he winked at me, meaning tomorrow morning early. And that reminds me, I forgot to tell you that right after the meeting in the railroad coach, Poetry and Dragonfly and I had asked Eagle Eye if we could borrow his rowboat tomorrow morning early, and he said we could, and had handed us the key so we could unlock it. So when Poetry winked at me, my hand slid into one of my pockets and brought out the key, which I held half hidden, yet so Poetry could see it. Dragonfly saw it too, but I looked at him with my eyebrows down so he wouldn't look happy and make the rest of the gang wonder what mischief was afoot. We even arranged it so that the 3 of us could sleep in the same tent that night. Whichever one of us should awaken first in the morning was supposed to waken the rest of us. I crawled into my sleeping bag, zipped up the zipper, pulled the nice warm blankets close around my chin because the nights were always cold up there, and pretty soon I was a goner, which means I was asleep. I didn't know anything, although, of course, when a boy is asleep and doesn't know anything, he doesn't know it. Right away, it seemed, I was awake again. Something felt like a kitten's feet was jumping up and down on my stomach. I was terribly sleepy and I didn't want to wake up all the way up. But I supposed it was Poetry or Dragonfly, so I made myself open my eyes. It wasn't even daylight yet inside the tent, although I could see out through a little crack where the tent flap was open toward the east. I could hear 2 people breathing, one on each side of me, so I knew Poetry and Dragonfly were still asleep. Yet something was bouncing around on my stomach, something that had little feet and was using all of them. You can guess, this part sounds funny. You can guess I woke up in a hurry. I sneaked my hand under my pillow for my flashlight, turned it on, and stared at what I saw. It was a wild animal. An actual wild animal. Are you asleep, bud? This is a good part. I ought to save this for some other time. I'll read it for you, Sissy, and then I'll read it again tomorrow. An actual wild animal. A wild cat. No, not a wild cat, but a wild polecat. which is a skunk. I could smell him, and anybody who knows what a skunk smells like doesn't like it. That little black and white skunk stopped bouncing on my stomach when I flashed the light on him and just stared at the light with his two green eyes looking like two tiny flashlights shining right in my face. Before I knew it, I'd hissed, "Scat!" That woke Poetry, and he jumped as if somebody had punched him in the ribs. He threw back his blankets and sat straight up, grabbing his nose quick with one hand. Well, that scared the skunk. and he whirled around like a flash with his big, bushy black and white tail straight up in the air, which meant he was angry or scared or excited and was going to spray his ridiculous perfume all over the tent. I'd seen skunks do that back along Sugar Creek when one of Circus's dad's dogs was about to catch it. "Duck!" I whispered fiercely to Poetry, which he did, and which I did even quicker. Mr. Skunk, however, must have had good home training, or else he wasn't excited enough, for he ran like a kitten straight for the tent flap and went out, leaving enough of his unnecessary perfume behind to make us want to get out too. Dragonfly, as you already know, was always sleepy in the morning, but all of a sudden he woke up, grabbed his nose, and said, "What on earth?" Poetry shushed him, saying in a hoarse whisper, "We've just had company." "What time is it?" Dragonfly asked. I looked at my luminous dialed watch, and it was 4:30. I stuck my head out through the tent flap and looked towards the northeast where the sun was supposed to rise. The sky was already sort of pearlish pink. It was time to get up and go catch that 20-pound northern pike. I won't stop there.